on this Zoom. I just have a couple housekeeping items. First of all, even though the agenda has minutes and an action, we will not be taking any action today. This is just a briefing. So we will take care of those minutes during the regular meeting portion of our retreat next week. So if you want to look at the minutes, that's fine. You're more than welcome to, but we will not be acting on those. Just a reminder for board members about our retreat. It's a week from tomorrow. That is Friday, September 8th. I'm getting my dates. I can't believe it's September tomorrow. It starts at 10 a.m. It's at the Monson Center. You should have a calendar invite. Please note that my reminder email and the calendar invite has it going until 3. There's a good chance that it could be going until 4. So board members, if you could be aware, if you've already made plans and you need to bust out at 3, we understand, but the end of that meeting is just going to be with members of the board. There's going to be some great discussion, and it's quite possible. In fact, I expect that we'll go after 3 o'clock, pushing 4, but we will not go past 4. So just be aware, start time 10, end time sometime between 3 and 4. Business casual, lunch of course will be provided. We'll have chairs and vice chairs of our advisory councils will be joining. All the members of the advisory councils will not be joining. We've only invited the chairs and vice chairs to attend for just a portion of that meeting. I appreciate that Elwood Downing is here in our meeting. He's the consultant that has been working with the board. The majority of the meeting, the retreat, besides the regular meeting portion, will actually be run by him as he discusses with the board the results of the survey and his own findings as he's been reviewing the board itself. We'll then have a great opportunity as a board for action items future for the board and potential changes that we would like to see. So I've gotten a preview of his work. It's very exciting. I think it's very timely information and recommendations for us as members of the board. I think it's going to be a fantastic retreat, and I'm done selling it. It's just going to be good. So we'd love to have you all out. I'm aware of, I think, 2 members of the board that have been excused, but I'm hoping that everybody else will be able to come. But before we get into the briefing portion, are there any questions, comments from members of the board that needs to be brought up before I turn the time to Spencer and his team? So we know that one of the most important duties of the board is our fiscal responsibility. So what we're going to be talking about this morning is our budget priorities that we'll be submitting to the governor's office and ultimately the legislature for the 2024 legislative session. We knew that there could be some discussion with this, and we wanted to be efficient with our board retreat time. So the plan is we're simply going to discuss it this morning, see if board members have any questions. Then the plan is this will be an action item during our retreat next week. That gives the staff time to make final preparations in order to meet the governor's office deadline of getting the requests in. So I'm going to turn the time to Spencer, who will take us through. You should have in board docs, you should have the information that we'll be going through this morning. Spencer.
Thank you, Dr. Wagner, or Chair Wagner, and good morning, everybody. And thank you for joining us. We get 2 weeks in a row with each other, but hopefully this is a way in which, as Robert mentioned, an opportunity to sort of discuss and internalize what our priorities are. hopefully you got the email from Denise that just reminded you we have these materials we got posted to the board agenda. There's two main priorities, but I'll just walk through a little bit, kind of big picture first. On the first sheet, it just gives an overview related to our budget. For FY24, it's very big to note that this past week we did receive word from the U.S. Treasury that the ARPA funds that have been requested and appropriated by the legislature in the 2022 legislative session have actually been approved. So Lisa is working with the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget to find out the mechanics by which we'll draw down those funds. Those funds are for our network backbone, as well as some other areas that were identified seemingly a long time ago. But anyway, so that's you'll see our budget for FY24 has a much bigger dollar amount attached to it because of those one-time funds from ARPA. Those need to be spent by the end of 2026. And so that'll be coming, and we'll be reporting on that as we head into.
Congratulations, that's awesome news.
Yeah.
It's like we have a rich uncle all of a sudden.
But being one-time funds, we have to be very judicious in how we spend that so it doesn't create more headaches down the road for us.
Well, hats off to you, Lisa, and everybody who made that happen. That is just marvelous.
Yeah, Lisa's put a lot of time into that. So anyway, moving into FY25, there are two primary requests that we want to talk about today. Our top priority, of course, is always compensation, and so we would just want to put that as a top priority, that however state employees are treated, that hopefully UETN employees are included there. The legislature last year was extremely generous on compensation, as probably you're all aware. It was a very fortunate year for all of us, I think. So jumping right in, number two is education cybersecurity. If you'll recall, in the June meeting, we did present more in concept what we were envisioning related to cybersecurity for UETN. For several years, UETN has provided cybersecurity services, but it has been something that I think has sort of grown organically over the years and maybe hasn't been as formalized as we're looking now. One of the drivers behind that is that there is now a Utah Cybersecurity Commission and a Utah Cyber Center housed in the Department of Public Safety. We've had Troy Jessup's on, he and Jim and I, especially Troy, but we've had a number of conversations with them and what they've been tasked to do on behalf of the state, including all government entities. Fortunately, education is a little further down the road than where they are in terms of the execution and understanding of the security landscape, if you will. But also we recognize there's a potential opportunity to partner with them, given where UETN is positioned and works with our LEAs and also in our relationship with higher education. And so this request is framed in that effort to work with the Cyber Center. Their focus is more on government entities, including local governments. And we're coming kind of in partnership with them with a focus on education. Yes.
I met with them yesterday, and they were meeting on cities and counties endpoint protection software. And I mentioned to them again, where was education in this? They said, as far as higher education is concerned and public ed, that UETN ought to continue to go forward and help the public schools with cybersecurity. They felt good about that. And that the system we have was set up with the institutions of higher education and the CIO group, that they work together to help bolster cybersecurity there. So they were all right with that. They feel overwhelmed with cities and towns and the counties. And that was kind of an interesting direction that came out of that meeting yesterday.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And that's also what we've been hearing as we've had those conversations. We met with them, Troy, I think, or Jim, it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, and that's essentially where it landed. They feel very comfortable. In fact, I think it was basically encouraging us to go down this road, and they see a lot of potential collaboration opportunities. They're learning a lot in what their role is going to be, and they do see a need for resources. You can imagine sort of the politics behind a state entity like that going to cities and counties and saying, "Hey, how can we do your cybersecurity for you?" So there's a lot ahead on their road. If you'll look at the document, this request is in two main parts. The one part is Troy has compiled, is focused on K-12, and it's sort of three-phased approach. The first part of which is getting some standardized tools. And as Steve mentioned, that's also what Department of Technology Services is looking at for state and local governments, which is primarily endpoint detection and managed detection. That's something that with he's been working with the tech directors. We interact with them regularly. This is a level of service, if you will, that all of our LEAs and K-12 partners are looking for some support on. And with UETN, we feel like there's also some opportunities of scale in terms of purchasing and negotiation that we bring to the table. That's also closely aligned. You'll see there's a higher education component associated with this request. That is a part of what higher education is looking at. The difference there, you'll see a significant dollar amount difference, $2.2 million versus actually $6 million. The higher amount is because with higher education, there's a much more substantial set of tools that they're pursuing. And it's funding, as it stands right now, it'd be funding that would go to higher education. And I know this is a conversation we need to have a little more exhaustively, but just by way of introduction, the thought there is that funding is primarily for tools, and there's also some funding for staffing. On the K-12 side, we're looking at 4 to 5 new staff that would be required to help not only deploy and support the implementation of these tools, but also some programming support for standardization around policies and best practices and so on. And Troy, do you want to, or Jim, do you want to just take 2 or 3 minutes on the K-12 side of this to make sure I'm not missing some major components of what we're proposing, if that's okay, Robert?
Yes, and I just want to say on the higher ed side, I have some pretty significant questions about the higher ed piece, and so I've spoken with Spencer and Steve. I think he's reached out to you. I'd like to call an internal higher ed meeting, Steve, have you, Spencer, and a few others for the beginning of next week, just so I could understand the request a little better. So I'm going to beg the board's patience on the higher ed side. You'll see the proposal there, but I'd like to dig a little deeper on that proposal. So I think we can go ahead and discuss the K through 12. I'd like to hold on a lengthy discussion on the higher ed until we have further discussion. And then at the retreat next week, when this comes up, I think whatever is proposed on the higher ed side, we can have a discussion, make sure the board is comfortable, of course, before any vote. So if that's okay, that's how I'd like to handle the higher ed piece. Jared, I see you've got a hand.
Yeah, just on that note, who are you thinking might be involved with that? Could I come along and help facilitate some of that?
Yes, I will make a note of that, Jared. Thank you. Yep.
All right.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Patty, you have a hand.
Yes, first I have to tell everyone, because I'm so excited where I'm at right now. Some people get excited to go to Puerto Vallarta or all of those things. I am at the Google AI convention right now, and I am like having the time of my life. So it's early here this morning, but I have to tell you what AI has a capacity to do at this point in time will blow your minds, and just what Google Tools just announced and what is coming down the line. But I have it's been like getting Christmas presents every day, like every session I'm attending. So I just had to say, put that out there. I don't brag about anything else, but I am at the Google AI conference, loving every second of it. Second, I wanted to say, can we meet with Scott Jones as well? He's our deputy superintendent for Utah State Board of Education, and kind of move down the path of what K-12 is doing, so that when we're marrying these solutions together, we don't have one that is just following instead of walking alongside. I think a lot of these decisions are going to be walk alongside decisions. They're going to be some are leading, some are following, but then there are some that's walking alongside. And I know that we've had a lot of conversations. I don't know if Dave or Jason, if any of you want to chime in with K-12 and what that looks like. And since this will be a K-16 solution, it sounds like through the documentation, maybe having some more of the K-12 folks on board with what that looks like in the long run.
Hey, thank you, Patty. Spencer, you were going to have your, oh, wait, I see a hand, Jason.
I was just gonna echo what Patty said. I agree 100%. I think also in the state K-12, we've been working individually a lot. I look in the 4 regional service agencies. We just did an RFI, and we were looking at CloudStrike, some of these tools that you're talking about, CloudStrike and Forward EDR and some different tools. And we chose one, but in visiting with Troy Jessup at UETN, it looks like UETN would maybe start taking some of that role too. And we would be able to better coordinate on the K-12 side, so that we're walking side by side instead of 41 different practices.
Thank you, Jason. Let's go to David. You've got your hand up, and then Steve.
Yeah, just really quick. I don't know where this conversation will go as far as the allocations being requested, that kind of thing. But my sense is we're a little bit behind in K-12 where higher ed is. And that may address some of those differences in what's being asked for. I can't applaud enough what Jason and Patty have said here. We really do need to get on the same page on what we're doing with cybersecurity and all working together on this. And Steve and I have had some good conversations about that in the past. I trust that this is where we're going to solve this problem. I really think it's important as an organization, UETN, take this up and make sure that we're on top of the cybersecurity.
Thank you, David. Steve.
Yeah, I just, Robert, maybe you can give us a little bit more insight before we go on our meeting next week about their concerns. We do have a policy we passed in higher education for cybersecurity, which we're trying to meet that standard. We've got together as CIOs to figure out how we're going to approach that and have a pretty good plan going forward. We've talked about a series of tools, so this is down the road quite a ways. We've gone through the commissioner's office 5 times for requests. It goes up through the Higher Education Appropriation Committee and has a hard time making it as a priority. So the commissioner suggested to us that we come to UETN to see if that we could go through them, through their committees on our cybersecurity initiative to see if we'd have better success. But there was, from the commissioner's office said, well, listen, there's productivity money that each of the institutions got, so they ought to be able to go forward and use that money to solve this themselves. But in the meeting with the CIOs, that didn't happen. So the question is, how do we get support for cybersecurity for higher education and get some funding and get some help from the legislature? Cybersecurity Commission has said, go for it. And you have your association and you're the CIO for the system, put together a proposal, and it sounds all right to us if you go through UETN. If that's not something UETN wants to do, then we'll go it alone and go to the legislature ourselves. So that's just what I wanted to say.
Yep, thank you, Steve. I want to be clear, I'm not speaking against the higher ed proposal. I'm simply saying that I have some questions about the funds and what they're going to be used for. For example, I have questions about the $5 million and the tools. Or is this truly going to be a shared service model, or is this simply a pass-through to the USHE institutions? I have a question related to the personnel. It looks like they would be University of Utah employees, whereas on the K through 12 side, the personnel would be UETN employees. So Steve, those are just some questions I think in a higher ed setting. I'm just proposing that we have more of an internal discussion there. I'm certainly not speaking out against it. I just want to understand, because it's been explained to me that there's a difference in the modeling between the requests. And I think it would just be good on the higher ed side to understand exactly what the $7.2 million that UETN is going to ask for, that we understand exactly what it is and where the money's going to go.
Fair enough. We got the detail. Be happy to share it.
Great. It's a significant request, and we have other requests too, as an organization. So I just really want to be clear. So thank you, Steve.
I'd also like to suggest that similar to Patty, involving their finance folks in K-12, that we involve our finance folks from USHE, so that we can be side by side in the request as it goes forward.
Great. I think what I'm going to do, and Patty, I appreciate you mentioning Scott. I think my concerns could be answered with just, again, an internal meeting on the higher ed side. So I'd like to propose, just like to let the board know that I'm going to do that and call a meeting just on the higher ed side. It's possible that the questions that I have could be addressed there. I'm confident that UETN will do a great job in bringing K through 12 and higher ed together in that effort. So if it's okay, the meeting that I'm going to call is just on the higher ed side, just to address some questions that I have. So, okay. Great. Patty?
Yes, so would that mean that we would need to call a separate meeting between higher education and K-12 and UETN in order to kind of flesh out some of these other ideas of how we walk alongside and lead? So it'd be two separate meetings?
If so, Patty, if you believe that meeting with K through 12 and higher ed and UETN is necessary to have before this budget request is voted on by the board, then yes, if the board is okay, ultimately with the request going through and that coordination being set up after that, it's whatever you would like to propose, Patty.
Okay, because I'm wondering, I'm looking at time-wise, if it would be good just for Scott Jones to be able to listen. He's over finance and IT operations. And if he could just be there to listen to the full proposal and what it looks like, then he'll be able to like make those connections in his mind, so that we wouldn't have to have two meetings.
Okay. Any other questions before we turn the time to Spencer and the team to walk through this a bit more?
I think for my part, Robert, I'm not sure exactly what you want to get into on your questions and whether or not we need to involve our finance folks in that. But I think what I'd like to do is just make sure that our commissioner and finance folks, I'm sure they're already aware that this is being proposed, but just to have them understand and make sure that we're being consistent in what we propose on our side as well. So I don't know if that means come to your meeting or if that's something I can do on the side. So
no, and that's a fine, Jared, and know that I have full faith and confidence in Steve as the USHE CIO to I'm sure, Steve, you are communicating with the commissioner's office and just. I'm not really concerned. I didn't want to take a lot of time in this meeting. I just have some questions on the higher ed side and how the money is going to be used. And I think my questions can get addressed in that setting.
Robert, I report to Nate Talley in my role as the CIO for the system. And I've reviewed this all with him.
Great.
Appreciate that, Steve. Sounds like we're all on board. So thank you.
Patty?
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify as well, Steve, I'm supportive. I'm supportive of the need, absolutely. And so it's not that, it's really trying to figure out how we connect on and then what it is that we need to ask for and what that looks like. So and if we're making decisions on behalf of K-12 and trying to do this K-16 policies request or whatever, as I was reading through that, what that looks like on behalf of UETN and what that looks like on behalf of higher education, just making sure we're going down the same road and that we're not meeting in different spaces, which then becomes less efficient for money, time, people, all of those things.
But just one other thing, I hope you read the news about the University of Michigan. We need to get on this. We are vulnerable. We have a lot of private information that people want, threat attackers. So we just need to move forward and get this moving.
Okay, Spencer, there are things that your team would like to present on.
Yeah, if it's okay, at least for the K-12 side, I think Troy and Jim can offer some detailed insight in exactly what we're contemplating, because I think it might help for those of you that are in K-12 what exactly we mean, because there's a lot underneath. When we talk about cybersecurity, that this isn't just going to magically take care of things, but it is a basic, I would say, a framework that I think we're trying to establish that helps standardize the LEAs, like David mentioned. So with that, maybe Jim or Troy.
I'd like to just start out real quickly and then turn this over to Troy. But a couple of things I'd comment on is we're really just following Spencer's leadership and request to put together what we think would be really the best way to work with the K-12 community. And this is just an extension of the collaboration that we've been doing with K-12 for many years. And we've been very successful in that area, but there's additional need. And it's just responsive to that. And really, as Troy has been working with this cyber commission on a state level, and I know Steve's involved in this also, but we've had a chance to meet with them and to have some discussions and show them what we've been doing. And I think that they are very supportive of this, and we want to move this together. But we do envision that one of the first steps we need to take is to put some tools in place that are available on a more ubiquitous basis for the K-12 community. And these might be tools that are in the same category as those used by higher ed, but because of resource issues and other things where we need to have perhaps less customization, less configuration, that they might even be different tools that are used in that higher ed environment. And so we want to make sure that in that respect, there is some separation between the K-12 and the higher ed efforts. And with that, I'll just, Troy, if you want to walk through it, but these are just our thoughts and the best planning that we can do, just kind of envisioning next steps as how we can increase the security capabilities at UETN.
Right.
Troy.
Yeah, there's not much really to add to that other than just to maybe provide a little more detail and say that one of the biggest struggles that K-12 has been experiencing is lack of funding to get comprehensive tools for cybersecurity. And so as we started thinking through how to approach this, we came up with a three-phased approach. The first one being the building of a consortium tools base and something that we can come together and standardize on, so that as we continue to develop into phase 2 and 3 of this implementation, that it's the same systems and services and capabilities that are bringing all of the different LEAs together so that we could start centrally monitoring those and providing higher level overwatch services in that true education cyber center perspective. Because phase 3 of this, if we get that far down the road, or when we get that far down the road, it shouldn't be an if anymore, is to provide managed security services so that an LEA can focus on the things that they can do and have the resources to do within their agencies. And then we could provide that supplemental capability, the threat hunting capability, the incident response capabilities, and other things at this higher level when necessary. But where LEAs have the resources that they need to have local control and management of these services, that we could provide more just consulting and resource additions when they're experiencing issues, incidents, and things like that. And so all of the conversations that we've had with many of the tech directors across the state, they're very supportive of this type of initiative. They think that UETN, in fact, I can probably own a little bit of this and say that we're a little bit behind where we should be. We probably should have done this a year or so ago. And so we're going to be playing catch up a little bit to make sure that everybody has the capabilities of really starting to provide better cybersecurity awareness and response and protection capabilities. So there's certainly a lot of details in some of these plans, but that gives you the broad strokes for sure. Any questions about that? Okay. Well then, Spencer, I think it goes back to you.
Okay. Okay. So that's the cybersecurity request. Very good discussion. And Robert, we'll work on getting that meeting scheduled. And of course, Patty, if any sort of follow-up we need to do with Scott as well, happy to, however we need to have that, make sure we're staying on the same page. We're all hitting kind of that season of tightening up and getting ready for our budgets as we head into the legislative session. So I am cognizant of making sure we're very succinct on this. The second item on our budget request is for education software. Luckily, this one's a little more straightforward, but it is a substantial amount. It's 3 main items. The Scribble software that was funded last year one time is up for renewal, and so that's part of this request. We've put the amount in what was funded last year. However, we might anticipate that that hopefully could be negotiated lower based on what we have in the current contract. And then the 2 other items, we've got $250,000 in this request for the online library. That library is up for contract next year. It's a 10-year contract. And so we're putting this in there with some anticipation that this contract could go up from where it's presently funded, just because over 10 years, costs for everything have gone up. And so this is a bit of a placeholder. We'll know more in November as we get information back with Laura. I can't remember if it's an RFI or an RFP, but we'll have much more solid figures for that. RFP, thank you. But there is a committee of, I believe, the library director from USBE, as well as folks from higher ed that are working on that RFP for the online library. And then the final piece is the largest one. This is for the Adobe Suite. That was funded at $2 million for K-12 last year on a one-time basis. This $4 million is in an effort to fund both public and higher education. In talking to Steve, the CIO's group, as well as the Adobe folks, as well as some in legislative leadership, there is some interest in pursuing a statewide license for Adobe for all of education. Of course, there's a lot of details that would have to come out as a result of that, but the primary thrust of this is to get state funding for Adobe for all of education. It may end up being a couple of contracts. It may be a number of nuances that end up being negotiated there, but the primary pursuit is to get state funding for Adobe for all of education on an ongoing basis. we'll watch that as we go into the session, whether it gets funded ongoing or on a partial basis. What we would hope for is at least for something 3 to 5 years, so that it becomes something negotiable with Adobe on a multi-year contract.
Spencer, I'd just say, if you come together as a state, you're going to get much better pricing as well.
That's the idea. So hopefully it's a lot less than 4 million, but that's that estimate. So that's the software request. Laura, I just took what I was going to have you say. I apologize. Anything I missed?
No, that's great. I would just add, in the document, you'll see that we also put some placeholders out 3 years because, of course, contracts are coming up for expiration. So this is just for FY25, but we thought it would be helpful to see ahead a couple of years on this same item.
Yeah. And that's what we hope to do more of, both for you as a board and as well for the USBE and USHE, as well as for the legislature, to at least kind of give a little bit more of a horizon on things, because there is quite a bit of software that we have licensed, and there's a fair amount of that is state funded. And so we do want to make sure we're representing that to the state as those licenses are out on the horizon. So Robert, with that, happy to take any more questions on that side.
Any questions from the board about that second request? Okay, any general questions from the board about the budget requests, things going to the governor timeline? Again, the idea will be this will be an action item presented to the board during our retreat next week. Okay. Hearing no other questions, and Spencer, I don't believe we have any other briefing agenda items. I am wondering, I'm fine with going ahead and closing the briefing meeting now for the whole board. If members of the board representing higher ed, if you're still available till 9:30, I'd be happy to maybe not even have to schedule a meeting next week and just meet right to now. So Christina, Jared, Steve, Greg, and Spencer, if you could join, if the board members representing higher ed would be willing to stay on the Zoom call, I can ask the questions that I have, if that would be okay.
It's all right with me.
Okay, great. Why don't we do that? The rest of the board members and staff, thank you all very, very much. Appreciate you joining, and we'll be seeing you in person next Friday at 10 a.m. at the Monson Center.
Thank you, Robert.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Robert, would it be okay if Troy stays on as well in case there's some questions around licensing? Sorry, Troy, are you okay on
No,
time?
yeah, absolutely. That's fine. No worries at all.
And are you good with me staying on? I just wanted to make sure that it's clearly understood.